The damp air clung to us like an unseen veil, heavy with the scent of decay and centuries-old dust. I moved cautiously, my steps slow and deliberate, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the oppressive darkness, illuminating ancient carvings lost to time. The sound of my footsteps echoed through the depths of the crypt, blending with the faint drip of water seeping through stone crevices, like the steady, rhythmic breath of something long dormant, now stirring at our arrival. This was a crypt that no one was meant to find. Its entrance had been hidden beneath an old Bavarian monastery, sealed so seamlessly into the stone that it had taken us days to uncover it. The door, thick with layers of sediment and dust, had been more than just concealed, it had been buried. Erased. It was as if someone had deliberately sealed it away, ensuring it would never be opened again. But we had opened it. With the final strike of our tools, the stone door groaned, shifting in place before revealing a staircase that plunged into utter darkness, leading to a place that was never meant to be disturbed. Deeper than we had anticipated, the crypt stretched below the earth in a maze of descending stone steps. At the bottom, we entered a vast hall, its ceiling lost in shadow. The remains of rusted torch brackets jutted from the walls, their flames long extinguished. The floor was buried beneath a thick blanket of dust and crumbled stone, the air so still it felt like even time had abandoned this place. I swept my light across the chamber. This wasn't an ordinary burial site. The architecture was different, no coffins, no inscriptions. There was no sign that this place had ever been meant for the dead. And then, we saw it. At the center of the chamber, a skeleton lay curled atop a raised stone platform. Arms crossed. Fingers rigid. One hand outstretched, its bony finger pointing directly at the far wall. It wasn't decayed. It wasn't normal. Its bones were eerily intact, pristine, as if untouched by time. No remnants of clothing, no burial artifacts, no inscription to mark its identity, just the bare, impossibly clean remains of something that should not exist. But that wasn't what made my skin crawl. It was its pose. This wasn't a body that had simply fallen here. It was frozen in place, unnaturally rigid, like something had stopped it at the moment of death. Its head tilted slightly toward us. Empty sockets gaped in the direction of the crypt's entrance, as if it had been watching us long before we even arrived. And its hand pointed unwaveringly toward the back wall. We turned. The wall was covered in symbols. Not ordinary inscriptions. Not language. These were marks. Intricate. Interwoven. A design that felt less like writing and more like a seal. Under the beam of our flashlights, the engravings shimmered faintly, as if laced with metal that should have corroded long ago. The symbols formed an incomplete pattern, broken in places, as though something had tried to erase them. The air around us grew heavier. Colder. A sound, low, deep, almost imperceptible, began to hum through the chamber. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't an echo. It was a vibration, pulsing through the stone like the slow, deliberate rhythm of a heartbeat. And yet, nothing alive should be down here. We activated our scanning equipment, aiming it at both the wall and the skeleton, trying to decipher its age, its origins. But when the results appeared on the screen, silence swallowed the room. The skeletal cells were still alive. Impossible. Again and again, we checked the data, our disbelief growing with every confirmation. The bones, untouched by decay, still displayed biological activity under magnification. As if they weren't remains at all. As if they had never stopped living. A crushing stillness settled over us. I slowly lifted my head, gaze locking onto those empty sockets. Something cold coiled in my chest. Was it just a trick of the light? Or was it watching me? My instinct screamed that this thing did not belong here. And worse, it should not still be alive. The next day, we returned with more equipment, determined to analyze the symbols on the wall. Our scanners continued to glitch sporadically, their signals disrupted by an unknown interference. Frustrated, we decided to take a more hands-on approach, clearing the layers of sediment by hand to better document the ancient carvings. The moment my fingers brushed the stone, something felt wrong. It was warm. Not the rough, lifeless chill of ancient rock, but something unsettlingly alive. There was a dampness to it, a faint, almost imperceptible pulse beneath my touch, as if the stone itself was not merely an object, but a thing that breathed. I wiped away a layer of dust. The symbols beneath emerged in clearer detail. Their lines were sharper now, more defined. Then, they started to fade. Not erode. Not crumble. But disappear. Like ink dissolving in water, like something actively retreating from sight. The intricate carvings, once so carefully etched into the stone, dissolved into nothingness until the wall was smooth and unmarked. As if the symbols had never been there at all. A sharp chill crawled up my spine. The air around us grew thick, oppressive, an unnatural cold settling into the crypt. Then, a sound. A low, trembling vibration. Not the wind. Not an echo. Something beneath us. A deep, resonant hum, like the earth itself was trying to speak. The walls shuddered. Dust rained down from the ceiling. The tomb was reacting, as if it knew what we had done. And then, a crisp, unmistakable sound of bone shifting. We spun around. Every single gaze landed on the skeleton's hand. It had moved. The rigid fingers, once frozen in an eternal point toward the wall, had unclenched. And the skull, which had been facing the entrance when we first arrived, had turned toward us. A thought, wild and absurd, raced through my mind before I could stop it. It's looking at us. The vibrations in the air grew more erratic, pulsing faster, like something waking up. Then, the walls bled. Dark liquid seeped from the spaces where the symbols had vanished. It wasn't water. It was thicker, sluggish as it oozed from the cracks, releasing a putrid stench of decay. I stumbled back, my fingers twitching involuntarily. My footsteps sounded wrong, impossibly loud, echoing back at me from places they shouldn't. Something was here. Something wrong. Something waiting. We had done something irreversible. We had unsealed something. The crypt's darkness thickened, swallowing the space between us. The air felt dense, watching, like the very walls were closing in. And that skeleton? Its empty sockets bore into us, a gaze that could not see, yet somehow knew. It knew we were here. It knew what we had done. And worse, it was not the only thing that knew. At exactly 3 a.m., I jolted awake. My heart pounded like a war drum, a panicked rhythm that filled my chest with a sense of impending dread. Outside the tent, everything was deathly still. Even the insects had gone silent, nothing but the high-pitched whine of silence ringing in my ears. I didn't know what had woken me. But my skin was cold, like something had touched me, something that had since vanished, leaving behind only a lingering chill. I grabbed my flashlight out of instinct, sweeping the beam over my notebook and gear. Everything looked normal. But the moment the light hit the portable monitor, my stomach twisted into a knot. The skeleton was still there, right in the center of the crypt, just as we'd left it. But its finger, it had moved. No longer pointing toward the carved wall. Now, it was aimed directly at the exit. As if it was trying to leave. I stared at the screen, pulse hammering, my mind racing through every possible explanation. A prank? Tampering? Or something far, far worse? I pulled up the footage from the last few hours. At exactly 3 a.m., the recording went dark. Not static. Not glitching. Just gone. That entire time span had vanished. The system wasn't broken. It had been wiped. Like something or someone had deliberately erased it. I swallowed hard, the taste of fear thick in my throat, and forced myself to move. I had to check it out with my own eyes. The air inside the crypt was colder than it had been during the day, unnaturally damp, clinging to my clothes like a wet shroud. The flashlight cut a narrow path through the blackness, but the walls were bare, smooth, clean. The symbols were gone. Completely. Not faded. Not buried. Just never there. The air reeked of rot, like something dead had been buried deep beneath the stone and was now stirring. I turned the beam toward the center of the chamber. The skeleton was still there. Still curled. Still pointing. I let out a shaky breath, half convinced I was losing my mind. But just as I turned to go, something in the corner of my eye stopped me. The floor. There was a dark smear spraying across the ground, wet, glistening. A liquid. It was oozing from the wall, pooling slowly into a jagged black stain. The smell was overpowering, metallic and foul, like rusted iron mixed with mold. And it was moving, flowing across the floor toward the skeleton. Drawn to it. Then I heard it. A soft, scraping whisper. Like someone dragging nails across stone. Like someone whispering. I looked up. And there it was. A face, twisted, barely human, emerging from the surface of the stone wall. Its features were warped, blurry, but the mouth was wide open, lips pulled back in a jagged, unnatural smile. It was looking at me. My heart thundered in my chest. The flashlight trembled in my grip, the beam flickering across that grotesque face. Then, it moved. Its lips parted. It began to whisper, low, broken, unintelligible sounds like echoes from a world that should not exist. And behind me, the skeleton's hand clenched into a fist. Its neck twisted with a sickening series of pops. The skull, slowly, turned toward me. I tried to move. Tried to run. But my legs wouldn't respond, like something invisible was pinning me in place. I couldn't move. The beam of light flicked toward the skeleton again. Its jaw had opened slightly. Mouth agape. As if it were trying to speak. But it had no vocal cords. It shouldn't be able to make a sound. And yet, the walls continued to bleed. The dark liquid spread further, inching toward me. The skeleton raised one finger and pointed directly at me. The crypt began to tremble. At first, it was just a faint vibration, barely noticeable. But then the ground cracked beneath my feet. Stone shattered. Chunks of rock tumbled from the ceiling like falling teeth. It felt like the entire underground chamber was coming undone. I broke free from the grip of my terror, stumbling backward, lungs burning, heart pounding so violently it felt like it might burst from my chest. But it was still watching me. The skeleton hadn't moved again, yet somehow those hollow sockets felt deeper now, vast, lightless voids that seemed to consume the flashlight's beam. Its finger no longer trembled. It pointed straight at me, unwavering. Behind it, the black liquid on the wall grew thicker, more viscous, rising slowly. It slithered up into the cracks that had opened in the stone, as though something inside was drinking it, feeding on the blood-dark substance. And then, I heard it. Laughter. Not human. Not right. It was broken and ragged, like something ancient and long dead trying to remember what joy once sounded like. It echoed from every direction, layering over itself in a twisted, discordant chorus. It was the sound of something freed. From the darkness, something began to take shape. Not the skeleton. Something else. A figure. A shadow forming within the cracked wall, oozing into existence like smoke given weight and hunger. Its outline wavered, undefined, but its presence was suffocating, a raw, ancient dread that pressed against my chest like a vice. It had no eyes. But I knew it was looking at me. It had no mouth. but I could hear its whispers, crooked syllables spoken in a language not meant for the living. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream, but my blood felt frozen. Then, my body began to move. Not on my own. My limbs, jerking, twitching, started to shift on their own accord. I looked down. My fingers were turning pale. Skin sliding away, revealing a sheen of slick, luminous bone beneath. I tried to stop it, tried to move, to scream, to speak, anything. But my fingers began to lengthen. The joints stretched unnaturally. My hands warped. I was being reshaped. Claimed. A voice, low and thunderous, rumbled against my ear, but it came from within.
You are the new vassal.
And then, everything collapsed. My mind, my body, everything I was pulled inward, crushed beneath the weight of something that didn't belong in this world. My vision went black, and the last thing I felt was it moving inside me.